My name is Gerry Robinson. I'm the author of The Cheyenne Story, An Interpretation of Courage. It's a tremendous honor to be asked to give the opening presentation and welcome address for the 2020 Montana Book Festival. As you're all aware, this year's event will be quite a bit different from those held in years past. It's the first ever all-virtual Montana Book Festival. You'll see many of the familiar features of a normal event, but there will also be quite a few changes. It seems that these days we're often asked to deal with big changes in nearly every aspect of our lives, and this event is no different. Big change is everywhere. Along with that change, many challenges have come our way that we've all been trying to meet as directly as possible. It seems we're constantly asked to make choices, and making those choices often present us with uncertain or unpredictable consequences. For example, I made the choice to publish my book in late December of last year. And 3 months later, the world changed. So on top of all the usual uncertainty of what kind of response my book would garner, I've experienced other challenging consequences as a result of this coronavirus situation. Who knew? So change, challenge, choices, and consequences. These can all be quite overwhelming at times, but by now, I think we've all found that if we approach them with a sense of unity and a sense of purpose, it's amazing what we can get through together. On the flip side, it's also been proven how, when we lack a sense of unity and shared purpose, what problems can arise. I believe you'll see how well working with a sense of unity and purpose works with this event. It's evident that it works in how the world is responding to this crisis. And I believe it's also evident in the narrative of my book, The Cheyenne Story. There's a shot of the cover there. The book is a novel, and it's the first installment of a trilogy I'm writing about the history of my tribe, the Northern Cheyenne, from post-Little Bighorn to the establishment of our reservation in southeast Montana. The genre is historical fiction, but the story is anchored in the real-life historical events that took place during that time. Book one relates the events that occurred when the majority of my tribe were displaced by the US government and removed from their traditional homeland near the Black Hills. It presents a relatively unknown battle that took place, which ultimately, through a type of domino effect, brought about the end of what has come to be called the Plains Indian War. What I try to get across in the story is that these were real people and real events. I do employ minor fictional devices that help tell certain aspects of the story, which necessitates the historical fiction classification. What I'd like to present today is a little about the story, the people, and how I wrote the book. And I'll let you determine whether it's fact or fiction. So with that, I've put together a bit of a PowerPoint, and we'll just start in with the cover. We'll move directly to a couple of the key players in the book. Any Northern Cheyenne child around the age of 7 can tell you who these two gentlemen are. The man on the left is the Sweet Medicine Chief Little Wolf, and the man sitting down is popularly known as Dull Knife. Dull Knife was a name that was given to him by his Lakota brother-in-laws in a jesting fashion, because they teased that he always had a dull knife. If you look through the history books, that's what he is predominantly known as, Dull Knife. However, his Cheyenne name was Morning Star. And out of respect for my Cheyenne heritage and his, that is how I present him in the book, as Morning Star. These two men played a significant role in the history of the Northern Cheyenne. And I use Little Wolf as one of my main protagonists. Dull Knife plays a secondary role. If you read the history books, most of them say he played the predominant role, but hopefully my book helps to set some of that straight. And it's becoming more and more evident as more and more history is discovered, the role that Little Wolf actually played in this period of time in Cheyenne history. So the other protagonist in my book is the man in the middle here. His name is William Rowland. He is my great-great-grandfather. Also to mention that Little Wolf was a great-great-uncle of mine. Both Little Wolf and William Rowland were married to sisters. The man on the left, William Rowland's right, telling the story through sign language, is named White Bull. Now, White Bull had an earlier name of Ice, and that is how I present him in the book, because quite honestly, I make some alterations in names in the book to help people to stay in touch with who I'm talking about. Most people know about Sitting Bull, and I also mention or bring up tell the story of a Cheyenne man named Last Bull. So to avoid the risk of having too much bull in my story, too many bulls in my story, I opted to change his name from White Bull back to his original name of Ice. The man on the right is a researcher named Odie Wheeler, who was doing research. Picture was taken in 1901 at Fort Keogh by the post photographer L.A. Huffman. Well, the story takes place on the plains, and I share the story from a Cheyenne perspective. So I include a map. I've had a map worked up that presents the plains from the Cheyenne perspective. In other words, all of these rivers that you see in this map are actual rivers. It's just I present and give the actual Cheyenne names for those rivers. If you look down in the center there, the Moonshell River is actually the Platte River, and the North Platte is known as the Moonshell. The Southern Platte is known as Fat River. Here we have the Missouri River. It's called the Big Greasy, and the Yellowstone River is known as Elk River. So what I try to do is present this story from as close to a completely a Cheyenne perspective as I can, with the exception of those parts where Bill Rowland plies his trade as interpreter and explains the Cheyenne way to the various non-native people in the book. So this book one focuses primarily on this part of the map, which is the Northern Plains, and in particular, it begins at this spot here in what are called the Shining Mountains, but today we call them the Bighorn Mountains. Here's a little closer look at that map, and what you see there are the travel routes that are taken by both my protagonists, Bill Rowland, who is the solid line, and Little Wolf, who moves along the dotted line there. So I track both these men throughout the book and present the events that happened during this period of time, which began 5 months to the day after the Little Bighorn fight, and ended at the end of May in 1877. Much of the book centers around a battle that took place, and I don't so much call it a battle anymore as an attack that took place on the main winter camp of the Northern Cheyenne in this valley, which is now called the Red Fork Valley in the Bighorn Mountains. At the time, The Cheyenne called it Willow Creek, and it was a regular winter camp area for not only the Cheyenne, but a lot of the other tribes. And historically, Native Americans throughout history would stop and camp here. And it was a very favorable winter camp spot because up the creek, kind of to the right of where I'm standing taking this picture, there's a warm spring that keeps the water open throughout the winter. So the valley is positioned on a geographic fault. You can see on the right the red sedimentary hills, and on the left the white cliffs that rose up when the earth, when the plates shifted, and presents a very, I think, unique and telling contrast. And I try to utilize that in the book as well. The soldiers moved into, well, the Cheyenne actually moved into this valley from the right of, again, the right of where I'm taking this picture, and they camped in this area right here, the green grassy area to the right center of the picture. They were there one day when the soldiers came in through what's called the East Gap and rode up the valley and attacked their camp. Here's another picture of this area. It's an aerial that shows some buildings that are currently existing there, but it displays the layout of the valley quite well. I describe events that took place in the valley, talk about a ravine that Little Wolf took some Cheyenne women and children up, and it's this ravine here. The remainder of the Cheyenne, once the attack took place, escaped out of the back of their lodges and ran this way up these ravines and up the creek here and up this big draw, and eventually climbed these mountains to get up out of the valley. Little Wolf and his band and several others came up through this area and went up this shelf that transects the wall of the canyon. So again, these are real people. This was a real event. This happened to my ancestors. And that's basically what I'm trying to get across in the book. I'm just trying to present the facts of what occurred. But in addition to that, I want to present not only what happened in this valley, but what happened in the hearts of the Cheyenne, and Little Wolf's heart, and my great-great-grandfather William Rowland's heart. One of the first bits of history that I discovered about my great-great-grandfather was a story about how after this battle, he was asked to come up to this area and help with a parley between the U.S. forces and the Northern Cheyenne, who were hidden up in these trenches. And it's well documented that he was there, that he performed his services as interpreter and helped with parley, which was unsuccessful. So it's very clear that he was there, but in every version of that event that I read, there was nothing, absolutely nothing, about how he felt about having to do that. He had married into the tribe 26 years earlier at Fort Laramie at the Horse Creek Treaty, time of the Horse Creek Treaty. And during the attack, 40 Cheyenne were killed, including several that died in this trench that cuts across the valley here. And it was up this trench that William Rowland rode to this parley. So he came across the bodies of many young men who he watched grow from infancy into adulthood. And when the history books tell the story of him sitting up here translating for Lieutenant Clark and on one side and Morningstar on the other, there's not one word about how he felt about that. So I included a chapter in the book that shares some of how he had to have felt about that. That was the first question I asked, was how would I have felt? And I'm hoping that as readers read the book, that's a question that they ask themselves. How would I have felt? Because this is a story about the Northern Cheyenne, but it's also a human story. It's a story about what happens in our hearts when challenging situations come upon us and how we react to them, how we feel about them. And I say we because it is a human story. It's about the human heart, not just a Cheyenne heart, but the human heart and how we deal with tragedy, with change, with all these difficult choices that we have to make. So this was a real place. This was a real event. And it involved real people. I present a whole list of tribal members throughout the story. It's one of the first remarks that my editor gave me was, you present a lot of names here, and it is challenging, I know, for people to get their heads around a lot of odd names, Cheyenne names. For instance, this man's name is Wild Hog. He is, for lack of a better term, Little Wolf's lieutenant. He is the head man of the Elk Scraper Society. He plays a significant role in book 1, book 2, and book 3. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to present some of the people who are in this book to hopefully impress upon people that these were real people, real lives were at stake, real hearts were troubled, hurt, and my hope that my hope for the feeling that people will have when they leave or when they put this book down, when they finish it and put this book down, is a very human connection with these people. One that perhaps helps them to grow past the traditional understanding of the Plains Indian War or Custer and the Indians, that type of thing. These are real human beings. So that's Wild Hog. This man is Old Crow. This is a picture that was taken of him in old age. He plays a major role in the book as well. This is Two Moons. He's in the book. He played a big role throughout this story and also in later years in Cheyenne history as well. Another man, his name is Young Two Moons. He was a nephew of the elder Two Moons and who gave him his name of Two Moons. It's a traditional Cheyenne naming process that where an uncle will bestow his name on a nephew out of respect and honor for that young man. Young Two Moons plays a big role in the book as well. This is another picture of the man that I showed you earlier with my great-great-grandfather. This is Ice. Again, he's well known as White Bull, but in the book I utilize the name of Ice, which is what he carried with him for many years, actually. This is my favorite picture of any Northern Cheyenne. This is Iron Tooth Woman. She is a great aunt of mine. This picture was taken by Thomas Marquis. She was 90-some years old at this time, and I present her story in the book as well. Have a great deal of respect for this woman. This is a picture of a young girl named Bear Woman. She is not in the book, but she is of the age that I present one character named Day Woman to be. This is where I bring in a fictional element. Day Woman, I changed the ages of a couple children in the book, and I do so for a reason. This is a picture of Day Woman in old age. She was alive when I was born. Day Woman, at the time of these events, was about 4 years old. I raised her up in age to about 11 or 12. There's another youth, a young boy named Gathering His Medicine, who actually was about 21 years old when this happened. And I brought him down to the age of 14. The reason I made those age changes is simply to help portray youth of that age, about 12 to 14, and the impact that these events would have had on Cheyenne youth at that time. There is a very real effect that has taken place as a result of these fights of these times. There is a very real intergenerational trauma that has been passed down through the generations, and its first effect was felt by the children who were living in these camps, who were involved in these times, all these times when they were displaced and sent south to Indian territory. And I needed some children to be able to tell that story through, and I opted to use these two primarily because they are well documented in history, and to be able to move them into this age group, I was able to show what a young girl of 12 who is just learning what her role is in society, what her role is in her family, how to be a young woman in Cheyenne society, and to have that just torn from her. And not only torn from her, but to watch relatives be killed, and to watch her entire village go up in flames. And I think that that's an important part of the story that gets overlooked in all of the Custer Crazy Horse generals and chiefs portrayals of what happened during this time. It's important to look into the hearts of these children and what took place there. And so Day Woman is a relative of mine, and I felt that it was useful and effective to present her in this way. Gathering His Medicine was 21, like I said. I brought him back down to the age of 14, where he had just begun to learn his role as a young man in Northern Cheyenne life, and all the responsibilities that were placed on his shoulders, that would be placed on his shoulders. I introduced him through a traditional Cheyenne evening game called Coyote, where one learns the responsibility of being a protector of your people. And at 21, he had just moved beyond that stage and into young manhood, and was beginning to take on that responsibility and act out that responsibility. But I chose to take him back to where he first began to learn that responsibility, because so many Cheyenne youth who, much like Day women, as a young Cheyenne woman, so many Cheyenne boys were just learning what was expected of them, what they could anticipate as they grew into adulthood. And they also had to watch their role models die in front of them, to watch their village be overrun, to watch loved ones die, be humiliated. It's just very, very important, I think, to understand today's events and today's troubles by taking a look back at where they started. And I believe that this is where so much of that intergenerational trauma occurred. PTSD was not invented with the Korean or the Vietnam War. It was a very real daily event for Cheyenne youth as well. So moving forward, a few other characters in the book that were very real. The young boy in the middle center rear, is named Billy Garnett. I present him from a standpoint that one would expect to see a young boy who is just beginning to move into adulthood, feeling very full of himself. And he has some growing up to do. And I ask all my Lakota relatives who are related to Billy Garnett to please give the story time to develop as I move through books 2 and 3. Book 1 does not present him in a very good light, but he is a good person, and he turned into a wonderful, wonderful historian and very important man. So the story is developing, like I said, and he plays a big, big part in it. Here's another man. This soldier on the left is William Philo Clark. He's a good friend of my great-great-grandfather. In fact, my great-great-grandfather was his first tutor in the Cheyenne Sign Language, or actually Universal Native American Sign Language. The man sitting is named Little Hawk. Mari Sandoz, the great author, wrote Cheyenne Autumn, misidentified him originally as Little Wolf, but he is in fact Little Hawk, who is an uncle of Crazy Horse. But my focus is on Lieutenant Clark there. This is one of the very few pictures of him, and gives a good representation of the man who was my great-great-grandfather's friend and a good friend to the Northern Cheyenne. He wrote a book that was published after his death in 1884, entitled The Indian Sign Language, and it was the primary book for learning Native American Sign Language for generations. It still actually is today the predominant book used in when one learns Indian Sign Language. And as I said, my great-great-grandfather was one of his very first tutors, and I tell that story in the book. And in fact, Lieutenant Clark, in his introduction to this book, tells that story in a small fashion, when he says, "On the march by their campfires at night and in the early gray of morning, just before charging down on a hostile Indian village, I took my first lessons in this language. And I tell that story of that lesson from my great-great-grandfather. These were real people. These were real events. This is real history. And I hope that if you are able to pick up a copy of the book, that you will be able to discern for yourselves that even though it is a novel, even though it is in the historical fiction genre, that it is in fact actual history. The Cheyenne people, Native American people, share history through stories, by telling stories. Oral tradition was how we did that for centuries, well, since the beginning of time. And oral tradition has begun to lose some of its power, especially during in stories that deal with these times. And growing up, I felt that it was important to begin to collect those stories and to put them together in a cohesive fashion. I heard fragmented parts of the story here and there growing up, and I never heard the story being told completely all the way through by any one storyteller. And oftentimes I'd hear different versions of the story of a one event being told several different ways. And that was confusing for me. So my hope, I actually have two audiences for this book. The first and most important is Cheyenne youth. My hope is that by reading this book, that Cheyenne youth will not have to go through that confusing period of time that I went through and that so many others of my generation went through, of trying to piece this story together, of trying to take these fragments and put them together to have a complete understanding of what actually happened here. Who were these people? And then the second audience is basically anyone who feels that they can identify with human struggle, with human heartache, and who has a desire, strong desire, to be able to tell the world, this is who I am, and this is where I belong. And that's what this story is about. So with that, I'll finish with this note, that challenging times will always present us with change, choices, and often unexpected consequences. They will also present us with opportunities, if we choose wisely, to be heroic. And maybe someday in the not too distant future, someone will look back and say, you know, that would make a great book. I'd like to thank the heroes who put this year's event together, the organizers, the tech-savvy geniuses, and all my fellow presenters. I'd also like to thank all of you who are attending this year. Now more than ever, we need to come together with a sense of unity and purpose to keep worthwhile traditions like Montana Book Festival active and alive. So welcome to this year's event. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerry Robinson, for welcoming everyone to our virtual event. Raised at the heart of the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation, Gerry Robinson grew up hearing fragmented stories about his ancestors. He then devoted nearly 20 years of his life to researching, traveling the country, and reaching back through time to reclaim his heritage. Robinson is a published historical writer and a member of Western Writers of America. His debut novel, The Cheyenne Story, An Interpretation of Courage, is the first installment of a three-volume series. It is the book many have waited for, a balanced and compelling presentation of Northern Cheyenne history shared by a member of the tribe and a direct descendant of those involved. Gerry, congratulations on the Cheyenne Story that has won the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum's 2020 Award for Outstanding Western Novel, as well as being named the Wyoming State Historical Society Book of the Year for Fiction and a finalist for the first book in the High Plains Book Awards. And thank you to everyone watching. Just a reminder, you can purchase books by Gerry and many others at Fact and Fiction's website, factandfictionbooks.com. I also urge you to purchase the Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. There, you can also donate so that we can continue our programming after the festival with our Montana Book Festival events. Thank you to everyone, and we hope you enjoy this year's Montana Book Festival.
Hi, I'm just popping in again. Yes, everyone, please buy Gerry's book and welcome to this year's 2020 virtual events. Thanks so much.
Thank you.